The consistent ethic of life is an expression that is associated in particular with Archbishop Cardinal Bernardin, who was he was Archbishop of Chicago, and he was also in leadership among the U.S. bishops for a considerable stretch of the post-Vatican II period, from the beginning in the late 1960s and continuing through the 1990s when he died. And he began to propose this idea of being consistently pro-life at a series of lectures. I believe the first was at Fordham University, but some of them ended up being at places like the National Press Club or the American Bar Association and other universities, where he challenged people to say that if you care about human rights and human dignity, that it just makes so much sense to say we don't distinguish different age groups of human life, or different ethnic groups, or different guilty or innocent human groups. That if you truly believe that there is such a thing as human dignity and human rights in more, I guess you could say, political language, then the best test of how well we really believe that and whether we really mean it for everybody and not just for our favorite people is the way we treat the people that are perhaps hard to feel companionship with. Maybe, a criminal, or a person who is perhaps terribly disfigured by a disability, or a very elderly person, or a child who has yet to be born, that it may be perhaps difficult to feel a sense of shared humanity with that individual, but if we do believe that we are human, and that humanity can be pointed to fairly easily if you look at just our genetic code, that those people call for, that they deserve our respect, and that we have to try to respect both their life itself, their basic right to live, as well as their quality of life. And so he thought that if we try to show consistent concern for human life across the lifespan, and both quality of life as well as simply the ability to live in the first place, I don't think he was doing it simply for pragmatic reasons. I think it was a matter of principle for him. But I also think that he hoped that some of the, I guess you could say, the divisions among different social advocacy groups who have this or that favorite social cause that they care about, that they could begin to see that they should not be treating each other as competitors or as adversaries, but as people who are concerned about human dignity, who perhaps have a certain special vocation to care about humans at a certain place on the lifespan, or a certain disadvantaged group that they especially sympathize with, but that they really ought to try to see each other as all being on the same team, all really trying to protect humans wherever they find them, wherever they meet them. I do think that the idea of trying to be consistent does appeal to many who think that human dignity is important, who think that there is such a thing as inalienable human rights. And I think that it's interesting that the consistent ethic of life does expand beyond Catholic circles. There is actually and I guess you could say it's a network of, it's called Consistent Life. You can go online and find it. And it's a network of different advocacy groups and individuals who have embraced this idea of respect for human life across the lifespan. And if you go to their member organizations, it's everything from Catholic religious orders to gays and lesbians for life, to atheists for life, to feminists for life, to pro-life Jews. I mean, it's very interesting how these different groups can all see that if they're concerned about human dignity, that it is just much more convincing, I think, to try to say you're concerned about it everywhere and not just the group that's most like yourself.
When Cardinal Bernardin articulated the consistent ethic of life, it was an effort, I think, to bring together the Church's sort of medical moral tradition and people who traditionally call pro-life but focused on abortion, and the social justice people in the Church. And so it was an effort, I think, to tie all of that together. The issues on the other side, you have the abortion, end-of-life issues on one side. On the other side, you have all the social justice questions. So questions about a decent wage, about housing, sufficient housing, about adequate education, etc., would all have been on the sort of social justice side of the agenda. The whole tradition really goes back to the dignity of the human person. And all of these things really flow out of that. And that's the fundamental value, really, in all of Catholic social teaching, but really in all of Catholic moral theology. Really is all about the dignity of the human person. I'm not sure it's been entirely successful. There's sort of lip service paid to it. The tension still exists, from my experience, at the grassroots level, often between people who work on abortion issues and sometimes end-of-life issues, and people who work on issues of justice, etc. Our Jesuit province in the late 1990s, no, actually in the early part of this century, sponsored a workshop at our retreat center in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, bringing together people in Louisiana from the dioceses who were doing anti-abortion work and social justice work. And that process, if it's of interest to people, is actually posted on the website for the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops, including the evaluation of the experience and what they would do differently over the course of a 2 or 3 day workshop. But it's been a goal, I think, of a number of people to try to blend together, as Bernardine was trying to get us to do, that range of issues. John Paul II, in fact, does it in Evangelium Vitae, in the Gospel of Life encyclical that he wrote. He does tie all the issues together. But we're not always as successful as a church, and individual church leaders do not necessarily do it as well as either Bernardine did or as John Paul II did. A number of people have I think, make a distinction between what they would call innocent human life, which almost means children and preborn children, to use that phrase that people sometimes use, and that somehow it doesn't extend, for example, to the convicted murderer who is on death row. And yet Pope John Paul II, or now Blessed John Paul II, himself intervened to try to prevent certain executions in the world. And the human dignity part of who we are is not contingent upon what we've done. It's almost like salvation is offered to any of us, no matter what we've done at any point in our life. So too is the human dignity that people have. This consistent ethic of life is meant to extend to everyone, no matter what condition they're in, and no matter what their background is, and no matter what they've done.